Vinoo, the White House did have the opportunity here to have its own lawyers at that committee challenging statements like that, an opportunity they didn't have in the Intelligence Committee. They chose not to do it. Watching it now, do you think it was the right move?
I think the Republicans have sort of conceded that this is going to go forward, and their view is simple. All hail the king. President Trump is the king. They keep saying that this is an attempt to overthrow an election. Well, if that's true, then what they're saying is that there can be no way to overthrow the election, and that because he's a king, and as Trump said himself, and they played this during the hearing just a short while ago, the clip of President Trump saying Article 2 gives him the power to do whatever he wants as president. Absolutely false, and this is clear. What's happened is that they have real no defense, because if you notice when they keep saying, they're saying the process is unfair, that there are no live witnesses, well, it's a spin because they won't let the witnesses come forward, and because they themselves don't want this to go forward. At no point do the Republicans say that he didn't do it. What they're saying is they're trying to get technical and saying there's no quid pro quo. You don't need a quid pro quo. And they're saying he didn't complete the act. Well, look, one of them said it earlier. Attempted murder is still a crime. Attempted bribery is still a crime. So none of this actually is an attempt. There is nothing the Republicans can do to slow this down at this point.
Vinoo, I want to just go a little bit further on that point. You'd think that constitutional law is fairly cut and dry in black and white, but clearly when we see these playing out, it's not playing out that way when you listen to Republicans versus Democrats. How legitimate are those Republican arguments that actually this is all very open to interpretation?
See, constitutional law actually isn't so cut and dry, and that's why you have constitutional scholars of different persuasions. That's why you had constitutional scholars, both considered left constitutional scholars and right constitutional scholars, agree, for example, that the Second Amendment affirms an individual's right to bear arms. So, you know, constitutional law in and of itself is quite open to interpretation, but in this particular case, I can't imagine what would constitute a high crime and misdemeanor more than a president of the United States trying to solicit a foreigner, a foreign government head, to help him politically. I mean, this wasn't for the betterment of the country. This is specifically the kind of thing that the framers did not want, and they put in the Foreign Emoluments Clause into the Constitution. So this is actually cut and dry. And the fact that the president himself will not cooperate, will not assist with the investigation, is in and of itself an impeachable offense. Nixon provided transcripts. Clinton appeared. They all cooperated with the impeachment process itself. The fact that President Trump refuses to allow people to go forward, to cooperate the process, that in and of itself is impeachable. The very fact that, and they say there's no live fact witnesses, well, all those people work for Trump, and he won't let them speak. So this is in itself an impeachable offense, and in essence, what the Republicans' new motto should be is all hail the king.
Right. Well, Vinoo, as you point out, we hear these expressions, high crimes and misdemeanors, for example. And a key role of those constitutional experts is to explain the full legal meaning of these terms that have suddenly become crucial. Here's Professor Feldman on that.
The words high crimes and misdemeanors refer to abuse of the office of the presidency for personal advantage, or to corrupt the electoral process, or to subvert the national security of the United States. There's no mystery about the words high crimes and misdemeanors. The word high modifies both crimes and misdemeanors, so they're both high. And high means connected to the office of the presidency, connected to office.
Michael, watching this, I get the feeling that the Democrats are trying to give the country a tutorial on constitutional law. The question is that going to move the needle of public opinion at all on the question of impeachment?
Well, it's hard to know that, obviously. I think that you've seen a small fluctuation in that needle movement. And you saw it also, I think you saw a greater one during the Clinton years where the public seemed opposed to it. And then nobody really knows who has their wind at their back when it comes to this time. But I do think it's an important part of the role of the Judiciary Committee, regardless of what the effect is going to be on the public opinion, is to bring out what, in fact, they are looking at here and defining that. The very first question to 3 different witnesses that was asked by Norm Eisen, who is the counsel for the House Democrats on the committee, was to 3 of these 4 witnesses. He asked if this was an abuse of the office of the president. All agreed that it was. Those sorts of things, and I don't like saying dumbing it down, but just sort of making it plain English rather than legalese. That is, if they're going to move that needle, that's the most important thing that Jerry Nadler and his committee have to do here in Washington now, Calev.
Vinoo, going forward after this committee, the Judiciary Committee, is actually in charge of drawing up articles of impeachment. Walk us a little bit through what that might look like.
Well, I think they've laid it out in the report, and if you look at the table of contents, now it's a different committee, obviously, but they've laid out the president's conduct, and on page 6 of the report, the president forced out the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, and it goes through a whole litany of things, including that the president's scheme was exposed. And then drafting the article will be involving the president's obstruction of the House Representatives impeachment inquiry, and it lays out a bunch of things. So I don't think it's going to be that dramatically different than what came out of the Intelligence Committee. I will say this about moving the needle. I think that he's calling these witnesses today, while somewhat necessary, I'm not necessarily sure this is the way to do it, because the reality is the people that support President Trump are not watching. So therefore, it's not going to move the needle with his folks. And there is a danger, and I think Michael used the word, wonkiness, or someone used it, that this is going to create, the last thing people want to hear from are law professors. I can tell you that there's an expression that those who can't do teach, right? So a lot of times these academics are people who have actually never practiced. That being said, these professors, for the most part, gave pretty easy to understand examples. And one of them gave an example of being pulled over by the cop, and the cop saying, hey, I'll let it go for $20. But then, you say you don't have $20. Okay, I'm going to let you go. That's still a crime.
Right.
And
well,
I think that those kind of examples are very helpful.